Hello, I'm David Breeden. I'm the senior minister at First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, a historically humanist congregation, and this is Coffee and Wisdom. Last week, we were looking at the social gospel, a movement that started in the 1870s, went through about the First World War period or so, that brought social justice issues to the fore among mainline Protestant churches in the United States. This week, we're looking at the movement post-World War I, from social gospel to social witness, try to bring us up to kind of where we are today in terms of where mainline Protestantism is in terms of social justice issues. Next week, we'll try to take a little bit of a look at where we may be going in the future. Well, so back to the 50s now. Probably the best book that I know of anyway, it's old at this point, but it's still great, is Piety Along the Potomac, Notes on Politics and Morals in the 50s by William Lee Miller. This is a book that looks at the sudden sweep of piety that occurs just after the Second World War throughout the 1950s in the United States. William Lee Miller was a speechwriter for Adlai Stevenson, so he was very much involved in the politics of the day. He later wrote a biography of Jimmy Carter, so very involved in American politics and in American political connection to religion, because Dr. Miller was a religious studies professor. Now, here's some trivia for you. 2 U.S. presidents have changed religions while in office. Who are they? Well, you would win $64,000 if you knew. Dwight Eisenhower. He moved from Mennonite to Presbyterian. As a matter of fact, he was baptized 10 days after his inauguration. And Donald Trump, who went from Presbyterian to non-denominational. Now, so, Presbyterians gain one and lose one among the American presidents, but also it's very indicative of the changing scope of American religion in the United States, that Eisenhower would go Presbyterian, very down the middle of the road kind of Protestant denomination, and Donald Trump would go from being traditionally Presbyterian to non-denominational, a much more popular way of looking at religion to this day. So politicians do kind of know what they're doing when they look at what religion to be. The U.S. church membership was at 49% in 1940, the year before the war, and that is, by the way, the same as today. U.S. church membership, 49% of the U.S. adult population in 1940. By 1960, after the Second World War, however, it had jumped up by 20 percentage points to 69%. So 69% of U.S. Adults were members of some kind of congregation in 1960, and that topped out, by the way, at 73%. That's as high as church membership has gotten. So about 3/4 of the population at its highest point. So what is happening here when 49% of the U.S. population are church members in 1940, and it pops up to 69% by 1960? Well, several things happened. For one, there was a temporary ceasefire, really, between the left and the right. We had been watching that as I was tracing the 1870s into the First World War period, where there was this already a split, especially right after the First World War, between right and left, conservative and liberal kinds of Christianity, especially Protestant Christianity in the United States. So that's been going on. But then after the war, something else happens besides just a ceasefire. So let's take a look and see what we can figure out here. Well, one thing that happened that's very indicative is that "Under God" was added to the Pledge of Allegiance in 1954, and "In God We Trust" became the official U.S. motto in 1956. So again, piety on the Potomac, a sudden burst of religious thinking in the United States. What happened? Well, of course, one of the things that happened was Stalin in Russia. The Soviet Union was the great enemy of the post-World War II period. They were atheists, and so Americans needed to be non-atheists. And that is one of the central ideas that's going on here. How much of this was powered by fear, joining churches that we really needed to do this because we have to keep the fabric of America strong. How much of it was simply, doing what the Joneses next door were doing, and everybody's joining a church, so maybe we need to do that as well. Yeah, there are lots of ideas sociologically about why this happened, but it did happen right after the Second World War through the mid part of the 1960s, which we will be looking at tomorrow. One of the things that happened during this period is that religion begins to change in newer ways than just right, left, political left and right, or conservative and liberal thinking. And one of those is the sudden intrusion of this power of positive thinking. Dr. Norman Vincent Peale was the pastor of the Marble Collegiate Church in New York City. He was, by the way, the minister for Donald Trump's parents, and the reason that Donald Trump was raised a Presbyterian, because yes, Norman Vincent Peale was a Presbyterian minister, and the center of his teaching was this power of positive thinking. You can create your reality by going through, and he had a 10-step process that he talked about. The book came out in 1952. It's never been out of print. It has sold millions of copies. I can guarantee you can go into just about any bookstore in the United States today, and you will find a nice, fresh printing of this in paperback. So 1952, it's been around for a very long time. You see the subtitle here, A Practical Guide to Mastering the Problems of Everyday Living. Now, one of the things you're going to notice about looking at this book is, where's the religion? It's not Reverend Norman Vincent Peale. It's not Reverend Dr. Norman Vincent Peale. And indeed, that's one of the questions that a lot of the more conservative Christians began to ask is, wait a minute, how is the power of positive thinking connected to religion at all? What's going on here? And does it have anything to do with the teachings of Jesus? Because this is about being happy and healthy and making money. It's not about serving the poor and that kind of thing. So already there's this setup of this problem that's going to develop. But yes, that's the book that the current president was raised with, The Power of Positive Thinking by Norman Vincent Peale. Another very popular preacher in the day was the Venerable Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen, who did a first radio and then TV show in 1952 to 57 called Life is Worth Living. You also notice that this is a very positive message that's going on. I do put in the Venerable because that is the first step toward becoming a saint in the Roman Catholic Church. And indeed, he has been credited with various miracles that will probably one day make him a saint. But he was quite the TV minister back in the day. And again, it was a very watered down, very middle of the road, very ecumenical kind of Christianity that he was teaching, even though here he is in his garb. Most famously, perhaps for many people, was that he said Stalin must one day meet his judgment, and just a few days later, Mr. Stalin died. So was he indeed working miracles in his Christian faith? That is still an open question, but look, it appears that the Roman Catholic Church will make Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen a full saint one of these days. So again, one of the big preachers of the day. But the biggest was, of course, Billy Graham, 1918 to 2018. That's a long time to live, 100 years. And he had a lot of effect on American culture beginning in the 1940s and through certainly the 1980s, maybe into the 90s, before he got a bit too old to get around. I am the way. No, he's not talking about himself, of course. He's talking about Jesus, but that sure is a good camera moment, isn't it? If you're the cameraman for Mr. Graham. So he really changed the way Americans perceived religion in the 1950s. Again, he was very careful to walk down a middle road, not really as evangelical as he actually was. He was very careful about that. And he would ask people to go to their mainline Protestant congregations after they were saved in his TV ministries. Another thing about him, of course, is he was called the Great Legitimator. He knew every president from Truman through Obama. It died when Obama was in office there, well, a couple years, but he wasn't getting around by the time Donald Trump was in. But that's quite a long time to affect American politics from Truman to Obama. You may, and if you are a big rock and roll fan, see the shape there on the left of your screen. Yes, that is a young Elvis Presley at the bedside, reading the Bible and praying with the Reverend Graham. So Billy Graham is getting around in the pop culture of his day, making quite a mark, and really becomes, I think, the icon of the 1950s understanding of religion. Very white Protestant, kind of middle of the road, and certainly reaching out into all aspects of American culture there. So the Great Legitimator, there he is with Mr. Eisenhower. They became confidants. Famously, Reverend Graham was a best friend of Lyndon Johnson a little bit later in time. So he certainly was there in the centers of power of his day, as was most of American religion. Adlai Stevenson, by the way, with Norman Vincent Peale, once famously said, "I find St. Paul appealing and Peale appalling." So not everyone in the religious camp liked Norman Vincent Peale. Some of the more serious, I guess, theologically inclined people found these guys a little bit questionable in general because they were a little bit milquetoast in the way that they were presenting religion. But again, probably the high point of the American religious consensus in the United States during this period, and probably something that won't come back again for quite some time. Graham famously said on the subject of heaven, "We are going to sit around the fireplace and have parties, and the angels will wait on us, and we'll drive down the golden streets in a yellow Cadillac convertible." Now, what could be wrong with that kind of heaven? Good American consumerist, nice dinner parties, etc. And that's, of course, why Graham was so appealing to the America of his day. No condemnation of material wealth at all. No way. As a matter of fact, in heaven, God buys Cadillacs and frequents General Motors. And so now you know. Eisenhower was a little more serious about religion in his public statements. This occurred right before his inauguration. He had already been elected. And he said this about religion: "Our form of government has no sense unless it is founded in a deeply felt religious faith. And I don't care what it is. With us, of course, it is the Judeo-Christian concept, but it must be a religion with all men are created equal." This, I think, is the central issue and thing that's going to become part of 1950s American religion. Again, our government must have this Judeo-Christian God in order to be better than the Soviet Union in our space race and all kinds of races that are going to go on during the Cold War. But it is an interesting way of looking at it. Eisenhower really probably wasn't very religious. Many people aren't. He was raised as a Mennonite in a sect of the Mennonite tradition, and really doesn't appear to have thought about it very much because, I mean, his sect were pacifists after all, and Eisenhower was definitely not a pacifist. So our form of government has no sense unless it is founded in deeply felt religious faith, and I don't care what it is. And there's the 50s for you. Coming up on December 20th at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, you can celebrate with We Humanists on our winter solstice celebration, 7 p.m. Sunday, December the 20th. It's a fun time had by all. Wednesday night at 7 p.m., our resident Bible scholar at FUS, Wendy Jerome, will be talking about a Sumerian Adam and Eve story. Those of you who have heard Reverend Wendy speak know that she is a very great Bible scholar and a humanist, and she'll be talking a little bit about the really the first story, the oldest story of the Adam and Eve story. Well, thanks a lot for listening, and we'll see you tomorrow with some more coffee and wisdom. Thanks.